Are you a control freak? Is your greatest fear being out of control? If so, maybe you are looking for satisfaction through power. Today, on Living the Message, we will find our way out of that identity trap. Hey, this is Living the Message, where we discuss how the message of Christ might dwell among us richly. I'm Pastor Eric Targe, and I'm here with Senior Pastor of the Moody Church, Philip Miller. Hey, Philip.
Eric, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good.
I'm excited to talk today about the book of Ruth.
I know, yeah.
But we're not talking about Ruth as much. So
No.
it's like the book is about Ruth, but one of the things that you said at the very beginning of your sermon, which I thought was really interesting, which is so true, but we just miss it. It's named Ruth, but it's about Naomi.
It's really about Naomi.
Which
Yeah,
is
the story is
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it starts with Naomi. It ends with Naomi.
Mm-hmm.
The big climactic, line at the end is a son has been born to Naomi. It is her line, her inheritance. Elimelech's line has been reestablished. That's her marriage in Israel. That has to be the thing that's put right, that's set right. And so we really... at that point, Ruth and Boaz, it's sort of like we move on from them because they did their job. They had a baby.
Yeah.
and now it's about Naomi and the fulfillment of what God has done in her story. And so, it really, in many ways, it could be called Naomi.
So quick side note, why is it called Ruth and not Naomi? And why is Naomi not listed in the genealogy of Jesus, but Ruth is?
Yeah, well, because the genealogy of Jesus is tracing primarily through the bloodline, right? So that's why.
Okay, so Boaz
for that.
would be.
I think Ruth is such an anomaly, right? It's like here's this Moabite woman, who becomes part of Israel. Like it's an amazing story, and I think the only reason we have it actually is because of David. David becomes the king, and so it's a very interesting story tied to his origin. And I think David's probably trying to honor his, his great-grandma or whatever. Yeah. And just like, so I think that's where the story, falls in terms of Israel's, storyline. But the other thing is it's just beautiful, right? Yeah. I mean, Ruth is the hero. I mean, Naomi gives up basically, and Ruth never gives up on her. Yeah. And pledges her loyalty, her chesed, her loyal love to Naomi, and God's chesed is then revealed through their story through Boaz. So I think you have these deeply heroic characters, and so we're rightly drawing our attention to it. But my point was Naomi tends to get lost in the shuffle. It's sort of like we're a very romantic culture, and so we fixate on let's look at the love story, and we kind of forget this bigger, larger drama that's unfolding for Naomi, and so she just kind of gets pushed to the side. So I was just trying to bring that out and make her the chief aim of this message, and try to tell her story well. Yeah.
So Naomi we focus on Naomi because we're doing this series called Identity Traps, looking at the key places where we can put our identity instead of finding our identity as children of God. Can you just remind us real quick, what was Naomi's identity trap?
Yeah, so one of the deep hungers of our souls is for satisfaction. Yeah. And Naomi, we see the language. She says, I went away full, now I'm empty. Call me Mara, bitter, because my life has been emptied out. I've got nothing left, which is the language of fulfillment in distress, right? She's complaining. She's been emptied out. There's nothing to satisfy anymore. And so I would say her deep hunger is aligned with satisfaction. And then what we actually see is a little bit of a shift. I think you could argue that early in the story, Naomi is just doing whatever Elimelech wants to do. Elimelech says, hey, there's a famine, let's get out of here. Instead of repenting and trusting the Lord for the forgiveness and the mercies that are in God, he runs off to the land of Moab, to the land of Chemosh and the Moabite god, and he tries to build a life somewhere else. And I think Naomi, in many ways, is kind of going along for the ride. I mean, she trusts her husband, and she's going with him, and then he dies, and then she kind of looks to her sons. So I think you could argue that she's looking to people early on for satisfaction. The way she's going to be happy in life is she's going to be surrounded by people who can take care of her, Yeah. But then all those people fail. They fall away.
They
die, and she's left alone, and she has to do something with that grieving, broken, bitter heart, right?
Yeah.
And we see her caving in. She starts pushing her daughter-in-laws away. She starts isolating. She gets hard. She comes back to Bethlehem, and the women are like, "Is that you, Naomi?" And they're running toward her. And she's like, "Don't call me Naomi." She's pushing them all away.
Yeah. Call me Mara.
Call me Mara. Bitter. The Lord's been bitter toward me. I'm accursed, And so I think what you see is like a shift. Instead of looking to people, which maybe she did in the beginning, she's been so burnt that now she's like, you know what, I can't look to anybody but myself. Like I'm not trusting my happiness, my fulfillment in life to anyone other than me. I'm gonna make sure I'm happy, and I'm gonna push everyone else away.
Looking
and you can
to
see,
self.
Yeah, it's like a control, like a power thing. It's
power.
Like,
okay, yeah.
Power.
So that's how you get to power.
Yeah, I think so.
It's self instead of people.
Yeah, because there's a vulnerability when you look to people or possessions. You can lose possessions, you can lose people.
Yeah.
But power is more about me and myself and taking care of myself. And so she's not a real powerful person, but that internal power of like controlling and pushing everyone away and self-protection and just sort of like, I'm going to make sure like my happiness is in no one's hands except for mine. I'm not going to trust God. I'm not going to trust other people. I'm not going to trust anything in life. I'm just going to I'm going to make sure I'm happy, and I'm not going to talk to anybody else about it, right? Just that sort of rigid control power lockdown. That's what she's doing.
I think that's really helpful to recognize that she saw that in her mind, God let her down.
Yep.
Elimelech, her husband, let her down. Her sons, Mahlon, Chilion, let her down. And now she says, well, I'm not going to let me down. And so that's
who else can I trust?
Yeah.
I'll look to myself.
So where would you say are other ways that we could know that other ways that we fall into that identity trap besides simply trusting ourselves? How else do we find satisfaction and power, might you say?
Yeah. Well, I think any time that we say, you know what, I'm going to make sure I get what makes me happy. Like I'm going to make sure I'm happy in life. I can't trust other people. I can't look to anyone else. Like I'm going to make sure it happens. I'm going to take control of outcomes. I'm going to try to manipulate, control. I'm not going to be vulnerable. I'm going to lock down. Like I think those are all impulses. I think in many ways this is really what our culture does today, because if you look to people and then people can, they can let you down and they can manipulate you. They can kind of say, well, here, do this, and then you'll be happy if you do what I want, So I think we sometimes get skeptical of like the amount of control people can have over us. Yeah. And we don't want to tether our happiness to the people around us because they might be fickle or they might let us down or they might abuse us or misuse us, right? And so, and possessions are a little bit of a fickle thing too. I mean, our world is so marketed toward like, buy this and you'll be happy, right? It's like everything's travel and you'll be happy. Memories will make you happy. Life, like all these experiences, everything will make you happy. So like you go, but the problem is you go do some of those things. You go buy that thing you've always been wanting, and it's amazing for like 2 weeks, and then it's like you're on to the next thing, and you realize like that didn't actually make me happy. Yeah. And that's a very disorienting thing. And so if people have disillusioned you and things and possessions have disillusioned you, I think what a lot of us then do is we look inside and we say, well, who am I? And if happiness isn't in stuff and it's not in people, maybe it's in me. And maybe if I just be me and I force myself on the world the way I perceive myself, and I don't care what you think, and I don't care if it makes me rich, like I'm just going to be me and I'll be authentic, and there's a control to that, right? It's like I won't let you hurt me, and I'm not going to be vulnerable. I'm just going to be me defiantly, take control of the narrative, and do that. But the problem, of course, is then we try to find cheerleaders to go tell us we're doing a good job at being authentically ourselves, which is a people trap all over again.
Yeah.
And some of us are trying to be so authentic that we get rich in the process, which is possessions again. So we can't escape the cycle. But I think the impulse of like looking inside to like find myself and like there's a satisfaction longing that's locking down and saying I don't want to be vulnerable to anyone else. I'm just going to trust myself.
Yeah.
You know?
I appreciate how you've outlined how you can fall into that trap, that if happiness is not found in people, if happiness is not found in stuff, maybe it's found in me. Like that's typically how we get there. I'm curious, what are some ways that you would say we can know if we've fallen into the trap? Because maybe hindsight's 2020.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't see, oh, that's how I got in here. How would you say that we've known, besides the lack of vulnerability that you've already talked about? Are there other ways that you would say we can diagnose this?
Yeah, I think if power and control is your dominant operating system, your greatest fear is feeling out of control, feeling like something happens to you where you can't actually make the outcome happen the way you want to. You make a play in life and it doesn't turn out the way you thought. Your 10-year plan isn't working. Those are impulse. They show you how much you're actually trying to control your world and your environment and your own happiness. Like you're holding on tight, right?
Yeah.
And so you're probably stressed out a lot. You probably get angry whenever you sense a loss of control. You're jealous of people who seem to have everything together and they're in control of their life, and they look like they've got it all together, but you're not. And so I think there's maybe an aching anxiety.
Yeah.
Like a feeling of out of control, which can feel vulnerable and it can feel very dissatisfying. Like I'm just not happy because I can't control my environment, right? And of course there is a healthy side to agency. We do need a sense of agency in the world. I'm not saying that's unhealthy, but when it becomes so rigid that it's like this is how I'm going to be happy in life, is I've got this under control and I'll take care of me and I'll make it happen. I think that's where it starts to become really unhealthy, and we're neglecting the resources that are ours in God, and that's what Naomi does, and that's why it's so beautiful when she has to wait in the end.
Yeah.
She finally has to just wait on the Lord. She can't control it. She can't scheme. She can't manipulate. She can't pull the levers. She has to sit still, be still, and know that I am God. Like that is the moment of her helplessness. Yeah. And it's also the moment where she discovers the mercy and grace and the fulfillment that God actually wants to bring into her life.
Can you expand on what you said just a moment ago about healthy agency? You said there is such a thing as healthy agency. What would you say that looks like? Is there? Yeah. How does that?
Yeah, we're not victims. We're not helpless. Like we don't, like Naomi in many ways, when her whole world falls apart, she's falling into a little bit of a victim mentality. She's like helpless. She's shutting down. She's pushing everyone away. And she's almost caving in on herself. And that we would say that's super sad, and it's super unhealthy, right? To feel so powerless, like you can't do anything in the universe. So there's a healthy side to what's the next right thing, what's the next best thing for me to do. These are the things I can control. These are the things I can proactively do to like improve my situation. That would be healthy agency. When it becomes rigid and controlling and manipulative and scheming and so brittle and hard, and that I cannot trust anyone. I can't trust God. I can't trust, like that would be a sign that it's gone too far, right? And my grasping for control has become an unhealthy thing. So.
No.
Does that make sense? Or?
That does, and that's really helpful. For our next question, I wanted to hit on a question that was brought into us by email from one of my students, actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, one of my law students. His name is Jack, and here's the question that Jack wrote in. Jack says, "You said throughout the sermon that Boaz was a redeemer through the practice of levirate marriage. Levirate marriages are governed by Deuteronomy 25, 5-10, and those verses start with, quote, if brothers dwell together. So how would it apply to the case of a relative whose husband died when the relatives lived at quite a distance from one another? Does it become binding as soon as Ruth moves back to where Boaz lives, regardless of how much time has passed, and the fact that he is merely a male relative and not a brother? So Jack had
this is yeah.
Jack's a very smart guy, and he has a whole bunch more with that. But I'm curious.
Well, and he's a good lawyer, right?
Oh yeah,
he's like, okay, let's go to the case law and let's
exactly.
Good.
Yeah, well done, Jack.
Well done,
good
Jack.
question.
So a couple things. What we see in Ruth and Boaz is not a pure levirate marriage in the classical sense. So. This is very complicated, and we don't know. We don't know very much about it because Ruth and Boaz are the only instance where we actually see this playing out, and it's not a textbook case. So every other instance where it's supposed to play out, it doesn't in the Old Testament. The men fail to perform the levirate marriage. Like in the
story of Onan.
Yes, there's a whole, and there's several of them with where they just. The men basically chicken out. They don't do what's required.
So what do you mean that this isn't a pure levirate marriage?
Well, so levirate marriage by definition, the classical sense, is if you had, let's say you have a family and there's 5 brothers, and the oldest one gets married, but before they're able to have a child, a male heir, son dies in war. Okay. Yeah. So now you've got 4 brothers coming up. Now they're young and they're aging as they're growing, okay? Now you've got this widow who has no legal standing in the society. It's very patriarchal, in many ways messed up, but it was the world of the day. And so the women didn't have inheritance rights and they were vulnerable. And so the best way to take care of them was make sure they got married.
Yeah. So it was kind of a social security net.
It is, and because you don't in these times you didn't go out and just buy land.
Yeah.
You lived and farmed on your dad's property. So your dad had farm, and you grow up and now you're getting married, and he says, okay, you can have these 5 acres, and you farm them, and you build a little house on the compound, and you're farming it. Well, it's still part of daddy's estate, really.
Yeah.
It belonged to the son, but now he's dead. And the widow wants to stay living on it, and she needs income. But who's going to farm it? Who's going to take care of her? And it has to stay a part of the family estate.
Yeah.
Because it's going to keep passing down through the... So the question is, how do you do that? Well, the institution was levirate marriage, which is the next brother in line, as soon as he's old enough, he has to get married to her.
Yeah.
And it's not a romantic thing. In our world, we're like, how dare you, right?
Yeah.
But in ancient world, it was the best way to protect and keep the estate together and keep the family name going. So you're not changing last names. It's staying in the family. It's still part of daddy's estate and all this stuff. So the brother was obligated. He didn't get to go pick his own wife. He had to marry her. Okay? That's the classic sense. And that's what, levirate marriage is supposed to be.
Yeah.
In Ruth and Boaz's case, Ruth is not an Israelite. Okay?
Yeah.
Naomi's technically the one who needs to get married to Elimelech's brother, but he's not in the picture or doesn't even have a brother. So Naomi's the widow that's bereft.
Oh, interesting.
Ruth is now derived down here, okay?
Yeah.
And so Ruth, in a sense, is like the surrogate for Naomi because Naomi's beyond childbearing years.
Yeah, childbearing years.
Childbearing years. Boaz is not even an immediate relative. He's like a cousin or uncle or something.
Yeah.
And so he's not obligated. And so what we see playing out here is not your classical example, but what we do see is that the principle of here's a vulnerable widow who doesn't have an ability to stand on her own feet in the economy. The line has been terminated. It needs to be reconstituted so that this is a part of the ongoing, the family name doesn't die out. And Boaz sees the principle of levirate marriage, of being a goel, a redeemer, and he voluntarily steps into it, even though he's not obligated.
Yeah.
And so
it wouldn't be a gain for him necessarily.
No. It's very.
And I think
costly.
that's one of the important things because I think some people, again, in our society, they're like, "Oh, great, he got a nice young young Moabite woman. But it's like, no,
Well, he is excited about
he's
that.
excited about that, but he doesn't get the land, he doesn't get all that stuff.
No.
That stays in the family line.
Right. As a matter of fact, he has to buy the land, give the payment to Naomi so she has some capital to live off of.
Yeah.
He has to lease the land annually from her, make payments.
Yeah.
As he farms it, the crops he gets to live off of, but Naomi now has an income stream during her years. And then as soon as this male heir is of age, all that land, it goes to Obed and his line.
Not to Boaz's sons if he had any.
Right. If Boaz has any other
relatives
exactly,
which is a big deal. Like we can't just miss that.
Right.
Yeah. So it shows the sacrifice. Yeah.
Yeah. In many ways, Boaz laid down his wealth and his estate to do the right thing and to father this heir, which becomes the line of Jesus, which is amazing that you have this amazing self-giving love and grace that is in the line of Jesus, who will come and lay down everything he has in order to propagate a line that had died off for an inheritance that we had forfeited, right? I mean, that's an amazing analogy or parallel, right?
I mean, bringing that back to Jack's question where he says, does it become binding as soon as Ruth moves back because Boaz is simply close? I think the point that you're bringing out is no, it doesn't. But Boaz isn't someone who's simply saying, hey, well, here are the rules and I don't have to do that. He's saying, this is what's right. Even though I'm clearly excused, I can do this according to law, and I should.
He had every reason to not do it. And he would be legally justified. But he senses the heart of God and the intent behind these levirate marriage rules, and he's willing to do what's best, what's just, what's right, and to rescue Naomi from falling through the cracks. I mean, it's a beautiful story.
I can't help it as you're talking about, but think about how Boaz in this situation had all the power that Naomi craved. Mm-hmm. Like he had the power, and yet he was willing to let it die. Like that's a really cool thing just to think about, that he wasn't seeking satisfaction in his power.
Right.
He didn't fall into that identity trap.
Yeah, and in a sense, the only way you can do that, the only way you can lay down your possessions like this, lay down your power, and be willing to serve, right? Obed's name is servant, which is, again, coming out of this story, that the service of sacrificial love on behalf of another. And for Boaz to do that requires that his identity is grounded in something bigger than his possessions and more than his power, and it's rooted in something beyond, right? He knows who he is as a covenant child of God. And so even when it's costly, he steps into this imaging of God, really. I mean, he becomes a picture of God for this family. It's beautiful, but it's all because his identity is rooted in the right place.
So let's just step one step further into that. Boaz obviously didn't have the gospel in its fullness at that time, but he was looking forward to it. He was looking forward to the day when Messiah would come. What resources in that gospel that maybe Boaz was looking to and looking forward to can help us with that need for satisfaction, especially satisfaction through power?
Yeah. Well, I think the first resource is just seeing that Jesus did this, right?
Yeah.
Philippians 2, he who is in very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be grasped and held on to, but made himself nothing, humbling himself, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of human beings, right? And he went to the cross, death on a cross, even a cross, right?
It's remarkable.
It's amazing that what Jesus did in relinquishing power and control, not my will, but yours be done, he prays, right? Just into your hands I commit my spirit. I mean, talk about open-handed living, right? Mm-hmm. And yet, it's for the joy set before him that he endures the cross, right? that he went through the cross, scorning its shame, in order for the joy of sitting down at the right hand of God the Father in glory, bringing many sons and daughters to glory, a vast inheritance, rescuing the people, us, who are falling through the cracks and we're going to lose everything and forfeit everything, and he rescued us. Right? What a beautiful picture of our Jesus, that he would do that for us. So that's a huge resource in the gospel. And then just recognizing that means our joy is in the Lord. Like our great satisfaction, the happiness we crave, we long for, we were made to know God and come alive and be fulfilled in relationship with him. And we forfeited that because of our sin, and we wake up in the universe estranged from God. And so we're hungry and aching and longing for more than what this world could ever provide. And yet all that glory is coming. It's been secured for us in Jesus. The happy ending our souls long for is coming, right? Because one day the dwelling of God will be with men, and he will wipe away every tear, and there will be no more sorrow or dying or crying or pain, and all things will be new, right? And God will be with us. And that is the greatest joy, the greatest satisfaction, the greatest happiness we could ever long for. So we were made for happiness. We were made for God. And all of that is coming our way in Jesus Christ. And that's good news, right? That's really good news. Which, if I can grab a hold of that and seize onto it and recognize that the Holy Spirit's right here with me right now, reminding me of my deep identity, who I am in Christ, and all of this inheritance is coming my way, all this glory, that helps me live right here, right now. I don't have to close off. I don't have to be rigidly in control. I can actually be open-handed in life. And even when things disappoint me, I have something that I'm holding on to, I'm looking forward to, that is a gift of grace, and it's coming my way in Jesus. I have something to live for, right? Yeah. And so redemption's coming. Yes. And I think that gives you gives me a lot of hope for everyday living, you know?
What a place to set our hope. If you're looking for satisfaction through power, to recognize that the joy of the Lord is our strength. Well, we hope you enjoyed this conversation. And if you haven't, we'd encourage you to go check out the message that went along with it. We always enjoy hearing from you, whether it's questions or encouragement or simply something that you want to share with us. You can do that by sending us an email at livingthemessage@moodychurch.org or by texting us in at 312-682-1888. We truly hope that you were encouraged, equipped, and enabled to now go and live the message.